We got to start off with a shout out to Liz King. Liz came to us 6 years ago with this idea, and Convene was also, we were at our infancy at that same time. But there was magic in the air because we have built amazing things in parallel together, and from myself and from Convene, really want to thank you for your support as Texi Talk has blossomed, so has Convene, and it's been a great partnership. And we're really grateful for that. We used to be the new kids in school, and we didn't know anybody in the industry. And Liz did a lot to get us in the mix and make us feel cool when we weren't. So, thank you. So Liz King and her team, amazing. So while I'm being nostalgic, I'm thinking back to 2009 when we started Convene, and we had this funny idea, which was to make conference centers sexy. It was like the least sexy thing, and we wanted to stand next to a bigger mission, and we saw that the world was so desperately needing collaboration and innovation to keep up with the pace of change in our evolving economy. And we saw meetings as being in the center of that. We believed that meetings meant so much more than the way they were perceived from the outside world. And so what I'd like to do today is share with you a little bit of our journey in trying to make meetings sexy and trying to operate within a broader context than where most people think about our industry. It stems from our belief that the best way to improve the world is to change the way that the world works. It's that for many of us, we spend the majority of our waking hours inside of offices, at meetings, in conferences. But when we think about how to improve the world, we think about it in these other altruistic ways that actually don't really correlate with the way that we spend the majority of our time. And to bring this point home within the context of meetings, I have a question I want to ask you guys, and I want you to seriously think about it, which is, how would the world be different or better if the UN was not set theater style? Sounds ridiculous, but think about it. Think about if the people that designed this venue knew that the way to solve the world's problems was not to sit like that, right? Imagine if our world leaders had to sit down in pods and actually do work and actually solve the world's problems. Imagine if when they all sat down, if North Korea and Russia and China and the US, imagine if they sat down and had lunch family style, where they had to serve each other and look each other in the eye and actually collaborate. Would the world be different? The entire world? I think it actually would. And this is the unspoken and often underappreciated power of meetings and meeting design, is to think about that. So maybe Liz's plans after this are to go and redesign the UN. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. Generally speaking, meetings and workplace is moving from tactical to strategic, which is something has happened over the past 100 years that our built environments and our ways of doing business has not caught up with, which is that we moved from an industrial economy where collaboration was kind of defined as the type of work that happens on an assembly line, where people don't talk to each other, but they just work in a linear fashion, to being much more collaborative. And so the role of meeting planners is now to evolve not into being tactical orchestrators of logistics for a day, but it's really about being curators of intellectual capital, to be orchestrating people in a way that helps them to achieve their best performance, to be more inspired, to have the best ideas, to share more openly, to connect with people. And the role of meeting planners is evolving in this capacity, but so is the role of meetings. The events that we're producing and the places that we work are moving from being commodity to experience. And to give you an outside of industry example, think about the way that ballparks and airports have evolved over the past 10 years. Right? Airports used to just be where planes would depart and arrive, and everybody's goal was to spend as little time there as possible. Right? We were all missing our flights because we couldn't bear to spend one more minute in the airport. But what do airports look like today? They're vibrant, they have restaurants, they have shopping, there's massage and spa. And I don't know if you guys have observed your own personal behavior changing recently, but for me, I have no qualms about getting to the airport even an hour and a half, 2 hours early and getting some work done and not dealing with the stress of travel. Think about ballparks. Ballparks used to sell tickets and seats, and the culinary experience was beer and popcorn. Today, ballparks are some of the largest hospitality centers in the world, right? They've eclipsed casinos as being these enormous event venues. And so what we're seeing is our entire world, as we're spending so much of our time in these cold digital places, there is a heightened appreciation and value of our human experience. And so this is kind of a rising expectation for all of us in our industry. And what we've done at Convene is we've really tried to transition the venue from being a vendor to being a true partner to meeting planners. Because with the rising expectation of the performance and the experience of events, what we've realized is that we need to take care of every single logistical detail so that we could give the planners time back so that they could focus on only the things that make their event special, and that all the other things should be taken care of without them having to ask. And so there's a transition in the relationship between planners and venues to being much more of a collaborative partnership. And we've even experienced over the past couple of years that when we started, everything was a hurried and hustled negotiation. But now our partners are coming to us and saying, can you share best practices? You've seen people do this. How can we do it better? And it's really starting to feel differently, and that's the way that our meeting is evolving, our industry is evolving. We have taken a human-centered design approach to the way that we build absolutely everything at Convene. And what this means is that we actually start with the humans. We realize that the success of a meeting is really not something that can be measured by itself in aggregate, but that the success of a meeting is actually the sum of the individual human experiences that happen inside of that space. And so when we think about building the meeting experience, we have to think about every individual person there, and we can't just jump to what we want the outcome to be. We have to actually start at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and realize that if somebody is hot or cold or hungry or uncomfortable, that they're never going to be achieving their best work. That we have to start at the bottom with the basic human needs. And then as we work our way up, we have to challenge ourselves to say, how can we get people, before people can be more productive, they have to be more confident. They have to be more trusting and trusted, right? They have to be more comfortable. They have to be happy. We have to work through all of these levels before we can start playing at the apex of the pyramid, which is really, in life it's self-actualization, but in business and in meetings, a lot of times it's that aha moment. It's that breakthrough moment in time. And we have to walk through every single one of these things before we can get to the top. And in the way that we design our meetings, in the way that we design our venues, we have to be aware of these different levels and resist the urge to just jump to what we want in the end. Here are some of the ways that we've done this, and I'll just share the best practices that we have discovered. And we are constantly learning every single day and discovering more. We're deeply curious as a company. But the first is, when we work with partners, we want to understand the purpose of the meeting, right? A lot of planners come to us and say, I need a room for 200 people set this way, da 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 da. And what we want to know is, but what are you trying to achieve? And the reality is we found that a lot of planners are receiving their requests and information in the same way we're getting it, right? They're getting a request that's how many people, how many seats, what the meal is. But what we need to know first and foremost is that if we're trying to align ourselves with outcomes, we need to start with the end in mind. We need to know, what is this executive or salesperson or conference, what is the material business outcome they're trying to achieve? Because they're not coming here to sit together and have lunch, they're coming here to achieve some business outcome. And so we need to start with the end in mind. Once we know that, we've been able to see patterns in need and understand what it is that people are actually doing here. I remember when we started Convene, and we were trying to figure out how all this stuff worked. And I was like, are there different types of meetings that we can start to anticipate and categorize things into? And my team came back to me and said, Chris, every meeting is different. Sometimes it's a whiteboarding session, sometimes it's a conference with presentation slides, other times it's a video conference or a board meeting. I was like, all right, and like other times it's like, how many other things? The truth is that that's pretty much what happens here over and over again, right? There starts to be patterns of need. And so what we started to do is identify that there were really 4 core meeting types, which I'll go through, but they're informative, generative, evaluative, and then socializing and networking. So informative meetings are kind of what we're doing today here in this moment, which is you have a predetermined set of information that somebody is trying to share with an audience. This is teaching and learning, right? This is an informative meeting. This could be a training session, it's a presentation, but this pattern of need tends to repeat, and the resources that we need, microphones, projectors, confidence monitors, speaker clocks, et cetera, tend to always present themselves in this style of meeting. Now, generative meetings are totally different. Generative meetings are where ideas are being created. This is where we're trying to inspire people to think of their best ideas. We're trying to extract those ideas and combine them and synthesize them into some type of cohesive outcome. Right, these are your brainstorming sessions. They tend to have also a continuous, people want to be close to the walls so they could write on them and tack things up. And so we think of this as generative style meetings. And then evaluative meetings are where decisions are made. This is your typical like boardroom style meeting where you come in with an agenda and you leave, and like our board meetings, we say, okay, does everybody approve of that idea? And we made a decision in that meeting. That's the outcome. And usually you have to kind of like phone a friend. You have to have a spider phone or a video conference to call a lawyer or accountant or whoever to advise the group. So these are the 3 core meeting types. Worth noting that when we see meetings happening, usually it's a mix of different things, but there's kind of a like primary and secondary meeting type, right? So like when you have this style informative meeting, but then the breakouts may be workshops that are generative. And then lastly is socialization and networking, which is a lot of what happens before, between, and after the conference. The other thing that we do is journey mapping. And there's 2 tricks to journey mapping. One is to break down time into its smallest possible and its smallest relevant component parts, and then map people's user experience through those moments in time. And not only to think about what they're doing in those moments in time, but think about what you want them to feel in that moment in time. And then you reverse engineer those outcomes. And then the other thing is breaking down your users into the smallest relevant addressable types. So a lot of meeting planners are like, oh, we have this many participants. It's like, okay, but let's break that down further. You might have a speaker who has different needs, like to get mic'd up, or a green room, or prep, or if you have a really famous speaker, like where is he or she going to eat lunch when they're getting bombarded with fans and stuff. We think about the general participant who's attending. Then we also think about who's the client, like who's the person who is paying for this, who got this approved on some budget, and what is the outcome that they're looking for. Right? And then as Convene, we really think about all of our team members as also being stakeholders and understanding we need to design spaces that help them to do their jobs better. The importance of design and service as part of the venue experience cannot be underappreciated. Design is the body language of your event. Right? Where you host an event speaks a lot about what the brand of that event is. It sets an expectation, right? If you tell me that you're having a meeting at the Mandarin Oriental, it's like, ooh, this sounds fancy. It's going to be, fat cats in pinstripe suits and egos to manage. And if you say it's going to be at, Javits, I know what that means, right? This huge expo. If you say it's a Convene, I hope that people know what that means. But the design and the venue selection really speaks a lot to what that conference is about. And you should really think about it as body language and think about what does it communicate when you host it in a certain part of town or a certain type of venue. When we think about the design inside of the venue, we think about the relationship between design and service like the way that a great technology company thinks about the relationship between hardware and software, which is that when we design the physical spaces and then we create our hospitality experience around it, we triangulate that with a deep understanding of use and need and desired outcomes. And so everything is helping to shape one another. And it makes a huge difference, right? Things like the iPhone could never have been built if the hardware was agnostic to the software, right? And then lastly, when we're designing spaces, we use a concept that we think of as anticipatory service or anticipatory design, which is kind of flipping the traditional measure of service quality in the hospitality industry from being about response time to trying to eliminate the number of times that people have to ask for things to begin with. Because going back to that Maslow hierarchy of needs, if people need something that they don't have, then they can't move up to that, the apex of the pyramid. That the majority of times that people ask for something, there are 9 things that they needed that they didn't want to be bothered to ask for, that they're doing without, right? So we try to set our rooms with a lot more resources than what people actually ask for, because how many times have I been in a meeting where I'm like, I didn't think I needed a whiteboard when I walked in here, but now I'm on a roll and I got a great idea going and I wish that there was one right here on the fly. But I'm not going to stop and have somebody go and grab one, especially if you're going to go and charge me a couple $100 for it, like some places do. And the overarching theme in our industry, in our world, and this was actually highlighted by Jeff Bezos in his shareholder letter that came out this week, is that consumers have a rising expectation for service. They really have a rising expectation for everything. And I'll tell you, I had an aha moment a couple months ago. I was getting on the Amtrak at Penn Station, not your venue of choice, I would assume. And I'm boarding the Acela, and there's a lady there handing out free coffee and donuts, thanking me for my business. And I thought to myself, people would have been tweeting about this or screaming about this in the most positive way 5 years ago if we did this at Convene, and now this is what Amtrak is doing. I'm like, I got to go back to the office and figure out, I thought we were on top of our stuff, but we need to step our game up a lot. The reason why is because technology has enabled consumers to be more empowered than ever before. People have more choices. Their choices are more specialized. The service delivery is more personalized and individualized than ever before. And any company that's using technology is actually able to understand individuals and anticipate their need. Is that when we are in our digital world, every single thing that we see is curated based on our specific needs, preferences, expectations, behavioral patterns, et cetera. And we live in little curated bubbles, every single one of us. This was not true 5 years ago. And this is a major development in terms of the way that customer expectation is evolving. And so what we need to think about is, how are we really humanizing everything? How are we creating customer centricity as part of every single element of our business, and how do we think about that all the time? Not as a concept that we reference occasionally, but as a lens through which we see the entire world. That every single decision that we're making as people and as companies is really from a much more empathetic, heartfelt, customer-centric perspective. And people who get this will have a warm embrace and will always be successful. And people who just do things the old way will have to figure out how to evolve. So I would love for everybody in this room as an industry, because we're all here helping each other evolve, is to think bigger and move faster. That we had a plan that we were discussing with our executive team earlier this week, and there was a conversation that was going on about, can we actually do this big idea that we have in front of us? Do we have the resources and capabilities? And I left that meeting and I'm on my way home, and I see that Elon Musk has announced that he's colonizing Mars by 2022. I go back to my team and I'm like, guys, we got to talk about something. Like, that thing that we thought was so big all of a sudden was so small. And so all of us need to be setting our sights higher and realizing that the resources and potential that we have as people today has never been greater at any point in the history of time. So thank you.